Peace and blessings, Facebook family and friends. Eraka R. And welcome to episode 1 of Journey to the Mountaintop, a return to purpose. When I first heard to do this series, I thought it was going to be about the events of 2025. But as I started working on it, I realized two things. One, I am blessed to have a lot of newcomers to my Facebook family since the last time I talked about me. And how can I talk about my return to purpose if I haven't yet talked about purpose and why and how I stepped out of it in the first place? The second thing I realized is that the events of 2025 didn't start in 2025. They're part of a continuum. And in order to tell the story, I have to start at the beginning. So, this first episode is about starting the story where it belongs. It is about formally introducing myself to my newer Facebook family and friends, and reminding my old heads and students who I am and how I am. This is not a detour, it's context. So, thank you all for being here. Let's go. So we're going to start at 1983. In 1983, I was a senior at Howard University. I lived off campus, but I would take the university shuttle to one of the dorms and then walk to my apartment. One cold winter evening, I had just missed the shuttle. Watched it pull off. So I decided that I was going to do the 30-minute wait inside the library where it was warm. When I walked in, I heard somebody speaking very passionately in one of the meeting rooms and poked my head in and saw what appeared to be a student talking to a bunch of other students. And he was talking about Egypt. Well, okay, I got 30 minutes to kill, cool. I'll just sit down and keep a close eye on the time. 2.5 hours later, I was completely transformed. Literally, no aspect of my personal or cultural life would ever be the same again. After I graduated, I sought as much information as I possibly could about Egypt, Kemet, and I found it. I was blessed to live in Washington, D.C. during the African-centered education renaissance of the 1980s and 1990s. Shout out to those of you in D.C. and Baltimore, Philadelphia, Atlanta, Los Angeles, anywhere those pockets of consciousness grew up. We were truly, truly blessed. I sat in the room with the brilliance of African-centered scholars and other conduits of truth. Dr. Charles Finch, Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, Brother Anthony Browder, Brother Runoka Rashidi, Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, Dr. Marimba Ani, and most reverently, among others, Dr. John Henrik Clarke. Words cannot express the power of information. And I was transformed by their teachings and my own studies. So much so that in 1986, I founded my own company, Ascension Productions at the time, later became Ma'at Enterprises, dedicated to one thing, and that was transforming as many other Black people as the universe would allow with the information to which I had been exposed. So 4 years later, in 1990, I began to wonder, can this disciplined transformation process that works so well on me and other individuals transform a community? Can consciousness be organized? While I was at Howard, my senior year, I had the privilege of pledging the Alpha chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. For me, the pledge process closely paralleled the cultural consciousness process, meaning take an individual and break them down, essentially, and then rebuild them in an identity that is outside of just their individuality, where they just automatically see themselves as part of a whole. Could that process be replicated with cultural consciousness? So the idea was to use the same process to pledge adults into an organization called the Unity. We would self-initiate with this intense process of studying Egyptian, continental African, and African American history. And then we, in turn, would initiate Howard students. Just like they could pledge Delta or Omega, they could pledge the Unity. Then they, in turn, would initiate young people from the communities that surrounded Howard, building bridges, channeling resources, changing values. The requirements were significant. Founders had to be single and had to relinquish all commitments outside of their jobs. We were going to live, study, and serve for a year together in the community that we wanted to impact. 6 months to self-initiate, and then 6 months to initiate the first group of Howard students. For 2 years, I recruited, walking through any door that was open. I did radio, television, organizational meetings, social situations, you name it, anywhere anyone would listen. And in 1992, I had 6 people who had committed. We moved into a townhouse that I rented on T Street in the Shaw community of Washington, D.C. The impact of our presence and our activities in the community was immeasurable. That said, after the 6-month self-initiation process, the Unity ended. And it ended because deep work does what deep work does. It clarifies purpose. For 2 of the founders, it meant literally pursuing the Yoruba priesthood. For another, it meant returning to her medical residency and going through that process with a different lens. And for the rest of us, it meant returning to our lives, but with an expanded consciousness. This is the scale at which I have always wrestled with purpose. I'm sharing this history with you because I want you to fully understand what I mean when I say purpose. I'm not talking about preferences or perceptions or philosophies. I'm talking about genuine transformation. Perhaps the best way to convey what I mean is through a poem that I wrote. It's called Legacy.
Woke up one morning. I was bathed in the gold of the sun's rays. I could barely open my eyes for the brightness of the light. As my eyes became adjusted, I realized that the light came from within the room, from within me. And then, in an instant, it was gone. I showered and dressed and stood before the mirror to define my beauty. I shaped and colored. Suddenly, there she was beside me, almost Nefertari. She looked at me, and I at her, and then she said, "You invest much time and currency in the beauty of your skin. Can you tally for me your investments in the beauty of your soul?" I looked for words to answer her, and then, in an instant, she was gone. I seated myself on the train, one of 1 million. on our way to education and employment, the fruits of the promised land. The train slowed to a halt, and a man beside me rose, and a presence took possession of the seat and of me, and I turned to face the beautifully scarred face of Harriet Tubman. "Child," she said, "this train ain't so much different from the one I rode not too long ago. But I went back to get some of my peoples who wasn't blessed by God with my strength. What you gonna do, child, now that you's in the promised land?" I started to ask her guidance, but then, in an instant, she was gone. I ran all the way to work. And I worked hard. You hear me? All morning, all afternoon, and most of the evening. And then I laid the fruits of my labor into the man's inbox. I stood there for a moment looking at the awards on his wall for outstanding productivity. "Are you wondering about your own productivity?" The janitor's voice boomed, and I whirled to face the tall frame and frizzy hair of Frederick Douglass. "In my day, the crack of a whip could have ended my life," he said. "In your day, the stroke of a pen could end yours. Whenever you cannot reap what you have sown, it is slavery. It was then, and it is now. Are you wondering about your own productivity?" I started to ask how I could free myself, but then, in an instant, he was gone. I called my girlfriend. We met for dinner. I told her about my day, and she waved it away. "Look, don't you pay no mind to that stuff, girl," she said. "Look, we spending more on this dinner than our grandparents made in a week. This is what they work for, to give us the things that they never had." The waiter interrupted to refill my champagne glass. "You must be very careful how you define us," he said. "I and others like me died so that all of our people could have a life of dignity." Malcolm X placed a hot, steaming towel in my hand and said, "Just because some of us have risen from field Negroes to house Negroes does not mean that we as a people are free." I grabbed my girlfriend's hand to prove my story, but she hadn't seen a thing. And then in an instant, he was gone. As I entered my home, I seesawed between satisfaction and shame as I inventoried the tangibles of my personal success. This was what they had worked for, she said. And maybe she was right. I mean, we've got black millionaires now. And Jesse Jackson, yeah. And more of us have entered the ranks of the middle class than ever before. Yes, they would be proud of me, of us. I shook off my day and turned on the nightly news. It seems that half of the black men are in prison. And half of the black babies are born to black babies. And a black child killed a black child in search of some self-respect. Yes, they would be proud of me, of us. I reached to turn off the world of those people, and that's when I saw it. Blood on my hand. disappeared as though it had been equally distributed amongst me and my peers. I screamed and I tried to rub it off, but I rubbed so hard that soon it was mixed with my own blood. I looked for something to stem the flow, and then it was gone. And I fell to my knees and I said, God, help me. And from the place inside my soul where the morning light had come, a voice without gender spoke. I have helped you. It is you who have not helped me. You have not helped me to live not only in you, but through you. My light is lost in the darkness of your misdirection. The blood on your hands, while no longer visible to you, is visible to me, and it will never leave until they toil in my name to save my children. Get up off your knees. Ask not for my help. I've given you faith, or so you profess. The time has come to live that faith, for I only help those who help themselves. The voice echoed throughout my soul, and then in an instant, it was gone. Suddenly, I understood the brilliance of the morning light. I understood that I will ultimately be judged not by the beauty of my skin, but by the beauty of my soul. I knew that I must go back and leave something behind for others to climb on, to follow as my people had followed the North Star. I knew that the fruits of my labor must feed others beside myself, that every black mind without direction is an inbox that I must contribute to. I knew that fancy dinners and fancy clothes and fancy homes were mere token rewards of the struggles of my history. On my ancestors' shoulders, I had climbed into a position to help others, and not to do so would be to spit upon their graves. Suddenly I knew what I had known somewhere all along, that the blood being shed by children was my own, the blood of my future. And try as I might to distance myself with wealth and education, our destinies are one. For you see, the day will come when I will be held accountable, when I will be asked what I was doing while my children died. Because in an instant, I too shall be gone, and my legacy must outlive my life. Thank you.
The legacy that I wanted to leave was very simple: transformation. The Unity experience taught me what real transformation requires. I mean, I could invite you, I could issue the invitation, but true transformation had to be chosen, and it had to be self-directed. I learned that lesson and I taught it on a national scale. For the next 30 years, I invited people to redefine identity and history and empowerment. I even had a radio program, FM radio program on WURD, broadcasting out of Philadelphia for several years. My flagship offering was the Awake Lecture Series, later called The Awakening. A 42-hour intensive, 3 straight days and nights. My attempt to Vulcan mind meld all the information that I had into my participants and invite them to redefine what it meant to be Black. I can say with certainty and humble pride that I transformed lives as I had been transformed. And if anyone who was touched by my work is watching this, leave me a comment in this post after the episode is done, just to let me know that you were here. That would make me very happy. Fast forward to 2003. My mom had passed several years earlier. My father had had a stroke and was experiencing the resulting dementia. He had been living with me for a year. I had had several, shall we say, suboptimal relationships. And the cherry on top, I had just been fired for being Black by a national conservation organization. I took the settlement money from my successful discrimination claim, put my father in a nice facility, and bought a home in Cumberland, Maryland, in the Allegheny Mountains, because mountains are my peace. And in all of that reality, I made some important decisions. One, I was never again going to get a 9-to-5 job. I had started doing contract work, investigating claims of discrimination. And I said, whatever lifestyle that work affords me is going to be my lifestyle. The second one was that I was going to retire outside of the United States because the U.S. is inhumane to people of color, to women, and to the elderly. And I was going to be a trifecta. So I'm out. Another, and perhaps the most important commitment that I made, I think some of you know about because I did a post about it, and that was to never love anybody else more than I loved myself. To be engaged in the process of self-actualization instead of trying to be engaged to someone else. And that all of my relationships of all kinds were going to circumnavigate around that core. Something else began to happen in those years in Cumberland. Knowledge began to become understanding. The information that had transformed my cultural identity began to shape and change my identity as a human being. The philosophy had deeper meaning. The history had deeper meaning. The change was so profound, I had to express it, and I wound up writing 2 books. Answers, a philosophical foundation for an empowered life. And When Loving God is Not Enough, personal empowerment through an expanded relationship with God. Those books are out of print now, but they're a part of my future. And I affirm they'll be a part of yours. I had arrived at a point where knowledge was no longer information, it was instruction, it was direction. And little did I know where following that direction would lead me. Join me next week for episode 2 of Journey to the Mountaintop. Walk with me.